What is the scariest true story you know? I grew up in a funeral home. I helped out in the office. When I was about 15, I got a call from a man whose wife and infant baby had been murdered in cold blood. There were very few clues. It made headlines. Cops set up surveillance at the viewing. It was heartbreaking, as the mother was holding the baby in her arms. I was asked to take the flower cards and periodically get the husband and ask if he recognized the names. I then photocopied them and put them back. I did it because I was a kid, people knew me, and I was unobtrusive. I talked to the husband quite a bit. He seemed devastated and shaken. The cops told me they had an eyewitness to someone leaving the house the day of the murder. The witness was a 3-year-old girl. She recognized the man leaving. It was the husband's best friend. Turns out that the friend and the husband had made a pact to kill each other's families and run off with their secretaries. The little girl identified the friend, and I guess one of them cracked. They both went to jail on multiple counts, all on the testimony of a 3-year-old. I still cannot believe to this day that that man stood right beside me, multiple times, and I had no clue. I don't think I ever looked at life the same way after that. What the F? And a few comments above. There was someone's grandma who witnessed, as 3-year-old, her mom being murdered from a woman and her dad married the woman who killed her mother. Living with her mother's killer in the same house and no one believed her. My great-aunt woke up in the middle of the night. She heard her dog making these low growls. She was single at the time and living alone in her ranch-style home. She walked out to her living room to check things out. She didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary, so she decided to make sure her door and front windows were locked. Door was locked, first window she checked was locked. When she lifted the mini blind on the second window, it was wide open and a guy in a ski mask was standing there. She said he laughed this evil laugh and said party time, then he started to climb in. She screamed that she had a gun. Her dog started barking his head off. The would-be rapist decided to bolt. My aunt did get a gun after that and learned how to use it. I can't even think about what would have happened to her if she didn't have her dog to warn her. Good dog. I'm so glad that nothing else happened to your aunt. Smart she is, taken further safety measures arming herself now. That could have been such a bad situation had her pup not barked. Everything to do with Hajj Muhammad Mezfewi. He was a shoemaker who lived in Morocco in the late 19th and early 20th century. He and his accomplice, a 70-year-old woman called Anna, used to drug and kill young women who came to the shop. Eventually one of the victim's parents traced her movements to the shop, and after the remains of 36 mutilated corpses were discovered nearby, Mezfewi and Anna were questioned, and tortured. Anna didn't survive, but Mezfewi confessed to murdering them, usually for a tiny amount of money. His initial sentence was crucifixion, a very unusual punishment even then. However, there were many protests from powerful foreign embassies, and Morocco couldn't do much against them. Instead he was sentenced to beheading, a more common punishment. However, the mood in Marrakesh was that this was far too lenient, so they settled on immurement, being walled up alive. A special cell was constructed in the wall of the bazaar, about 2 by 2 by 6 feet. Chains were attached to one wall to ensure he would be kept standing. Mezfewi wasn't told of his fate until the morning of his execution, when he was led, screaming, in chains and slowly bricked up inside. Once the last course had been laid, the crowd would fall silent until he started screaming, when they would cheer. He screamed nearly constantly for 2 days. On the 3rd day he fell silent. James Bulger. He was just 2 years old and with his mom running errands. She let go of his hand to pay the cashier, and he wandered away. 2 10-year-old boys spotted him, lured him toward them, took him by the hands and led him away. They took him to a remote location, pushing and kicking at him the whole time. Some people questioned the 2 kids with the crying toddler, but they lied, saying he was their brother, and nobody intervened further. They took him to a secluded spot and tortured him. I don't want to recount the torture details, it's just too gruesome. They left his body on some railroad tracks, hoping that being run over by a train would make it look like an accident. He was found days later, his body severed in half by a train. The boys were caught and became the youngest convicted murderers in British history. Security footage from the day they took James shows them watching children, picking out a target. And they were just kids themselves. They were released at 18. One of them is back in jail for possessing child abuse photos on his computer. The most terrifying thing about this for me is that my own son is only 2 now, and James's murderers were just children, too. It was premeditated and intentional and entirely random. Just a momentary lapse in attention and he became a target of 2 murderous children. Children. To think that children younger than my stepson are capable of such a thing, ugh. Everything about this case is just horrifying. My dad worked in a morgue during college in the 60s. One time on the night shift he was training under a recent hire who was wheeling a body down the hallway. The body was under a sheet but all of a sudden started to sit up. The guy immediately freaked out, ran out the doors and quit. Apparently a dead body can have muscle contractions in the abs causing it to start sitting up. The more you know, I guess. I had a guy tell me a story a couple of decades ago about how he was hiking in an area in South America and wandered away from other hikers in the area. The ground was wet and without warning it gave away and he got sucked into a fast-moving underground river, pitch black, completely submerged, and at the mercy of the current as it buffeted him against the sides of the tunnel. After some time the current subsided and he realized he was in a larger pocket, still pitch black and submerged. He said that even as he struggled to hold his breath, he didn't panic and realized that the water had to keep moving somewhere, so he moved around until he found another tunnel that sucked him in. At one point he began to see light so he punched upwards, broke through the ground and pulled himself out, soaking wet, gasping for air, and a bit of a distance away from the other dry hikers, who were somewhat bewildered when they saw him straggling up to them. Germanwings Flight 9525. The co-pilot locked himself in the cockpit and set the airplane for a slow descent into the French Alps. For 10 minutes, the crew desperately tried to get back into the cockpit, but in this post-9/11 world, the door was designed to withstand assault did not fail. This was a daytime flight. Passengers knew what was happening. They could see the mountains getting closer out the windows. This wasn't a quick, "What's that? OMG," out, this was a long, drawn-out realization of what was coming and the end was inevitable. Chilling. Even more dramatic is the fact that the flight was largely occupied by a school class on their way to visit Barcelona. My brother was a police officer. He had a call to check on the welfare of a mother who had not showed up for work. She had died on the sofa and her little toddler brought the little diaper pad and laid next to her, and died of dehydration. The little kid had opened the lower cabinets and drawers in the kitchen looking for food. He still cries about it. And he's not the crying kind.